Please like, subscribe. I'm honoured to be joined by the esteemed Professor Ha-Joon Chang, who is one of the great economists of our time. We'll go straight into it. I'm going to ask you a very basic, simple question. We've had 4 decades now of what people would call neoliberalism or free market economics or laissez-faire, whatever you want to call it, Thatcherism, Reaganism. And those who support those economics would say it has brought growth, it has brought, it brings innovation, makes everyone richer. What's the scorecard? 4 decades now. How's it all gone?
Well, the scorecard is rather pathetic. I mean, of course, they delivered one thing they had promised, which is greater inequality, because the logic was that in the process of raising inequality, we give more incentive for the richer people to create more wealth, which will eventually trickle down. But unfortunately, on every other front, they have failed. The neoliberals initially said that they want to bring down the inflation and make the economy more stable. Inflation, well, until the recent surge had been brought down, but at the cost of having financially more unstable economy. I mean, all this the booms and crashes and financial crisis. And we have not even seen more growth. That's the greatest neoliberal myth. Neoliberalism has not delivered higher growth. Growth rate has actually fallen since the neoliberal experiment compared to the more regulated days of more regulated capitalism in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So, I mean, we now live in a situation where inequalities are so high that it is actually the reducing social mobility. We live in a situation where, by definition, we are richer than ever, because insofar as the economy grows, we will be richer than ever. But we are not as rich as we could have been, because the growth rate has fallen. But most importantly, you have still this abject poverty and social deprivation, because in the process of implementing all these neoliberal reforms, we have destroyed the welfare system, we have destroyed our care system. So now we have reports of children starving in school, coming to school with a slice of moldy bread, stealing their mates' lunch. I mean, how is the country not scandalized for having these starving children in the order of the hundreds and thousands and even millions in a society which is one of the richest ever in human history? So I think that we really need to look at this in a different way. I mean, you cannot just swallow this advertisement, this propaganda, that we have become richer and everything is fine.
Now, in your brilliant new book, Edible Economics, A Hungry Economist Explains the World, make sure you get a copy, everyone. Now, you compare Liz Truss's fateful mini-budget to bringing back terrible 1990s Tex-Mex. What food, and throughout the book, this food comes up a lot. You can tell from the title, guys. Don't read it on an empty stomach. What food would you say Rishi Sunak's economic policy is now, and why? Don't just say the food. Why?
Yes, well, unfortunately, I think it's like bringing back those horrible the food of Britain, the pre-1990s. Overcooked meat, vegetable boiled to death, no spice, and but of course that they want to make it more palatable. So what they have offered is to load it with more gravy, maybe bacon rashers. They have reduced the amount of vegetable because it wasn't tasty anyway. And they are now offering the extra helpings of the oversweet desserts. These are like things like asylum processing in Rwanda, excuse me, the self-imposed austerity, anti-labor legislation. I'm appalled to see this the so-called minimum service requirement legislation that the Sunak government is contemplating, which will make a lot of industrial strike activities illegal. So yeah, I mean that these will make the dinner more palatable, because now you have more fat, you have more sugar, that you have less vegetable, but in the long run, this is unhealthy, and that is going to be bad for you.
Now, we've got lots of questions. People are very excited that I was interviewing you. Conrad on Patreon asks about wealth taxes to tackle inequality. And I bring this up because Labour under Keir Starmer have suggested that they don't support wealth taxes. What's your, or won't, they've said, sorry, as well as that, Labour have said under Keir Starmer that they're not looking at significant increases in tax because the tax burden in Britain is at a historic high. So there's no further room for further tax increases. So I'm just interested, wealth taxes, based on what Conrad says, and just what Labour are now saying about taxes and how we can't increase them for that reason.
Yeah, well, that's a very defeatist argument. That what I don't understand is that how so many people, including the supposedly progressive Labour politicians, think that taxes are something that you just take away from people and, I don't know, throw in the North Sea or burn in the incinerator. Taxes, our roads, our health system, our pension, our the programs for the youth and children, our culture. So the question to ask is whether the government is using the tax to deliver the right levels and combinations of public services to the population. That's got to be the question. The exact tax burden doesn't matter. Just think about it. I mean, if the low tax itself is so good, why don't everyone move to Paraguay? Huh? I mean, the top income tax rate is 10%, top corporation tax rate is 10%. I mean, on the basis of this low tax rhetoric, everyone should move to Paraguay. Of course, that very few people do, because in return for low taxes, the service that you get is low. So we are having the wrong debate. The exact level of tax, exact level of debt, these things don't matter. What matters is whether they are delivering the right result.
Now, you mentioned other countries. Lee Flaherty on Patreon asks what kind of alternative models we can look at. Given we're talking about food in your book, making comparisons, what I'm asking, not a question I ever thought I'd ask an esteemed economist. I love tiramisu. Where am I going to get the tiramisu, Ha-Joon?
Yeah, no, I mean, we all have our favorite food, but the first thing I have to make clear is that that there are different foods that with different things to offer. So I'm not saying that. I mean, what I'm going to say now is that the only model, only solution. But I think overall, the Scandinavian countries and some of the other continental European countries that got it better. I mean, if not exactly right, because what these countries have been able to create is a society that has a high degree of equality and high degree of social mobility, where the basic living standard is guaranteed for everyone. But still, that is growing fast, is innovative, and is performing much better than the United Kingdom. So you don't have to go far to look for a better working model of capitalism, but in the end, in the long run, the sky's the limit. You can imagine many different societies, and we all need to have a serious discussion about what we want and how we can deliver them, because there's this very high degree of fatalism that this is what we are going to be stuck with forever. Of course, I mean, it's very difficult to change the status quo, not least because the rich people control the media. They have disproportionate influence at the political system and so on. But I mean, just think about it. 200 years ago, a lot of people thought abolishing slavery in the U.S. was at best unrealistic. 100 years ago, this country was still struggling with child labor. So, a lot of things have changed because people fought for it, and the society have been transformed. So let's look around, look for, the British people have been very, very good at adopting new cuisine, different cuisine, completely the alien cuisine, and create a very interesting food culture. Of course, even in that context that you have food poverty, and you have the poor people living on unhealthy diet and so on. So I'm not saying that the food situation in this country is ideal, but compared to at least the 80s and 90s, we have a lot more exciting culinary culture. And why can't we do it with economics? Why can't we do it with the political system?
So staying on economic diet, why don't we have a better economic diet in Britain?
Well, I think there are a number of complex reasons, but I think the most important thing is that basically one school of economics called neoclassical school of economics has completely taken over the academic profession, and therefore the kind of advice that the government gets has become totally homogenized. Now, I'm not saying that neoclassical economics is particularly bad. Like all other schools of economics, it has its strengths and weaknesses. But the biggest problem with it is that it starts by accepting the existing distribution of income, wealth, and power, and then try to see whether you could introduce certain policies to make the society better. And sometimes there are such policies, but it therefore refrains from more fundamental reforms. And when you do that, you sound very nice to those people who are benefiting from the status quo, because you are only suggesting policies that involve no or minimal changes to the underlying the structure of distribution of income and power, and therefore that you become more acceptable. So unfortunately, this country has been influenced by those ideas more strongly than many others, because basically wealth is too influential in the political system in this country compared to, say, other European countries and some of the other Asian countries.
A couple of other questions. Automation. So there's often, we've heard for years, going back, when the personal computer arrived, there's always this fear that new technology will destroy jobs. And historically, I think it's fair to say that actually that happens, but often more jobs are created in its place. The personal computer may have destroyed jobs, but other jobs were created because of the personal computer. But there is a big fear now that, I suppose, people talk about what we call middle class jobs threatened. Yeah. So I'm interested in what you think about class and automation, and why people become angry about or more threatened about automation, because traditionally Luddism is the term that's used as pejorative. So just talk about automation and class.
Yeah. No, there's a rampant class hypocrisy there, because the panic, that's the only way I can describe it. Panic about job losses through automation has become rampant in the last 10, maybe 15 years, mainly because now automation is affecting what you call the middle class jobs. Now you have kind of a lot of the basic accounting and legal jobs being automated. You have even the artificial intelligence that can draw pictures and write newspaper articles. So suddenly, the people who comment on these things, the academics, journalists, the pundits in the think tanks and so on, they are starting to feel that automation is something that is relevant for themselves as well. because now it's going to affect the jobs of their, I don't know, spouses, their the siblings, their children, their friends. Whereas these people used to, until about 20 years ago, chide the blue-collar workers for protesting against automation, because at the time they argued, well, this is how capitalism works. You automate, you increase productivity, and then the more jobs are created. I mean, that is actually the broadly right, although these people at that point had completely ignored the fact that, when the jobs are destroyed, people's lives are destroyed. So you need social mechanisms to help these people to retrain and relocate and get re-employed and so on. But insofar as the overall long-term picture is concerned, they were actually the more right. But now that automation is going to affect jobs that are held by basically people they know, that they are suddenly feeling that this is an issue. I mean, I smell rampant class hypocrisy, because only 20 years ago, many of these people were, pouring the fire and brimstone on the blue-collar workers for resisting automation.
Classism and hypocrisy in British political discourse. I won't be having it, Ha-Joon.
Wow,
I won't be having
very
it.
rare, yeah.
James Grant on Patreon wants to know about the productivity puzzle for the UK. And what we've seen is a productivity crisis in this country, which has got particularly acute since 2010. What's going on and how would that change?
Well, I must first begin by saying that this country has had a fundamental problem with the productivity for a long time. In the last 25 years, of course, it has become worse in the last decade, but in the last 25 years, Britain have invested only about 17% of its national income, whereas that is at 21% in Germany, 23 in Sweden, 26 in Switzerland. So this country has basically neglected investments which are necessary in raising productivity. In order to increase productivity, you need to invest in infrastructure, you need to invest in new machines and so on. But this country hasn't done it. So actually, it was already running on empty. And that since the financial crisis, you had kind of compounded the problem by basically creating a regime of permanent austerity, which discourages the investment, and especially long-term investment, because the companies are seeing very slow, even negative growth of demand for their products. And what is the incentive for them to invest in the productivity enhancing measures? So they then all go for the short-term investments, that will bring return very quickly, but that don't raise productivity.
Finally, I always like to end on an optimistic note, and there's so much material at our disposal to fuel the optimism, so that's always helpful. And Daniel Goldstein on Patreon asks, as an economist, what are you optimistic in short, medium, and long term? What is there? Again, people, since 2016, I remember interviewing in 2016, and it feels like a different universe. Things weren't great in 2016, but it's been one never-ending car crash ever since. Optimism as a progressive economist who wants to see a different economic model, where is it?
Yeah, no, I am actually in the long run very optimistic about the world, and this country included, because we see the kind of new wave of social activism. All these industrial strikes and so on. Of course, the government is desperately trying to make most strikes illegal, but renewed power of trade unions, renewed industrial activism, young people, especially, but many others that getting motivated by the issues to do with climate change. No, because in the end, I mean, you can produce all kinds of nice ideas and nice policy proposals, but unless people act on them, but things are not going to change. And you know, since the days of the financial crisis in 2008, we have seen many different forms and waves of social activism. You know, that in the early 2010s, university economics students got organized to campaign for reforming economics, especially teaching of economics. And then we had the wave of the kind of political activism surrounding Jerry Corbyn and John McDonnell. Now we have the climate activism, industry activism. So, yeah, I mean, of course, that it takes time for these things to gel together, and the powers that be it are, I mean, doing their best to prevent changes. But in the long run, I think that exactly because of these things that we will see a better world.
That is exactly the optimism that we like to end on these videos and podcasts. Ha-Joon Chang, it's such an honor as always. Do get a copy, everyone, of Edible Economics. The thing about Ha-Joon Chang is he makes very complicated ideas very accessible to people who don't have perhaps a big, extensive understanding of economics. That's why he's such an invaluable part of I guess, the general movement or struggle that exists across the world for a world which is slightly different from the one we currently have, which most of us, if we're designing from scratch, wouldn't probably end up with what we've got now. So please do like and subscribe and support, share this video, spread the word. Ha-Joon Chang, thank you so much as ever.
Thank you.